Black programs at New Mexico State University. And we are so grateful to have everybody here for Real Talk. We have been doing a series called 50 Shades of Blackness, and it is the brainchild of our very own Dr. Henrietta Williams Pichon and Dr. Eric House, who are faculty on our campus. We did a podcast series called Black Excellence in Higher Education. And so one of the things that we've been doing is just asking our faculty and staff, what kinds of things can we do to make Black programs more welcoming, more engaging, and more meaningful. And so this was something that Dr. Pichon came up with the name. And so we have been doing our diligence in our own community, just talking about things that are impacting us that we have control over, such as colorism, Blackness, intersexualities, also talking about, what it means to be biracial in a time like this. And so we've been having those difficult conversations among ourselves. And so I couldn't think of a better way to close out this series. I had the privilege of being appointed to Representative Stapleton's Black Education Act. And we have with us Amy Whitfield, who is the Executive Director of the Office of African American Affairs, the State Office of African American Affairs. We also have Nicole Beffert, who worked alongside Representative Stapleton on the Black Education Act. We also have with us, let me see, I'm looking here. We have Mrs. Sherry Love, who I was very intentional about the people that I invited to this discussion, because we want to make sure that this is not just a discussion. We want to move the needle forward. We have made some historic history in New Mexico with regards to supports to our Black students, as well as employees, and we want to do our part down here. And so we also have Christopher Love, who is now, he's an alum. He used to be the Black Student Association president. And we also have with us Mr. Devontae Kirk Watson, who will share his story. And he was very instrumental in getting the Crown Act going. Who else we got here? I'm looking. Let's see here. Oh, we have Dr. Matute, who is one of our faculty, and this is very key for her because she has a child that receives services. And so as a mother, she has shared her passion about this topic of the Black Education Act, but she also has a passion for special education. Dr. House is with us. He is a faculty over in our English department. And so this is going to be a rich, robust conversation. But again, the end goal is to make sure that here in Las Cruces, we can continue to move the needle forward and to support this great work that is in progress. So without further ado, I want to introduce to some and welcome Senator Harold Pope Jr. Senator, thank you so much. When I reached out to you, you jumped on it. There was no hesitation in me asking you to join us, and you have been very supportive of everything that has been happening. So I just want to say thank you. Mike Cook, welcome. We have Mike Cook is here from the Bulletin, one of our major supporters as well. And so I just want to go ahead and start the conversation with a question. And so that question is open. I'm going to ask Devontae, I'm going to ask Amy Whitfield, and I'm also going to ask Senator Pope. What is the significance of right now? We'll talk about the Crown Act. What is the significance from your perspective of the Crown Act? And Devontae, I'd like to start with you because, again, you were very instrumental in getting this going. Trying to figure it out. Would you like to go ahead and start?
Sure. First off, I'd like to just say that, the Crown Act was truly a community effort. You had a high school student at Albuquerque High, Augustine Sines, who kind of brought this forward and did some of the research that was going on in other states with the Crown Act. He worked with Senator Cedillo Lopez, got other senators on board like Senator Linda Lopez and Senator Pinto, Senator Shendo. And I was lucky enough to get involved, and Devontae, got this moving as well. and I got involved before I was even elected and before the November race. So I really have to give credit to those folks for really getting the ball rolling. But to get back to your question, to just show that even in our state, when a lot of times that tricultural myth is just pushed all the time, there were people in our community that saw this as an issue and saw that we needed to do something in our state for African Americans, whether it be in school or in the workplace. And I was just happy to, at the end, come on board and get it across the finish line with the Majority Leader Stapleton. Um, Going forward, I think what it shows is there's other issues that we want to resolve. That's why we really need to have forums like this and have those real conversations. Because even here in this state, what we're dealing with here in Albuquerque could be different than what's going on in Las Cruces or what's going on in Hobbs. But no matter how small our percentages or the population, a lot of times it's always kind of thrown in our face that we're only 3%. Or how do we get these bills passed when it only impacts that amount of the community? But my argument is all that even though it's a small percentage, all those people matter. And if we're going to take care of all New Mexicans, that's what we need to do, to find ways that they're treated fairly and equitably. So I guess that's how I would answer the question there. I want to give other folks an opportunity to talk.
Thank you. And if I'm sorry, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. Senator Pope, do you mind explaining exactly what the Crown Act is?
Sure. So we actually had to rename it, just for folks, just so you know. The bill was hair discrimination. It was based on the Crown Act by Dove, like the Dove soap, the Dove shampoo and hair products. But what we did here in New Mexico, we made it the most inclusive bill. This bill deals with hair discrimination at the public, charter school, and in the workplace with the Human Rights Act. But it's not just African American women, it's men, it's people of all races, and it also includes cultural and religious headdresses. So because of that, Dove, it's not that they're against the bill, but they don't want us calling it the Crown Act anymore, because the Crown Act that they were pushing was specifically for Black women. And it's not that they don't support it, but we've just made it so inclusive here in New Mexico that we're calling it hair discrimination bill that was inspired by the Crown Act. So basically, if your child is going to a public school or a charter school and is being discriminated against their hair or harmed in any way by their hair, by the public school code and the charter school code, they have remedy to do something about it. Same with the Human Rights Act. As an adult in the workplace, you have protections there as well. So that's what the Crown Act does, starting 1 July.
Thank you. Devontae, I see that you are back. Did you want to go ahead and weigh in?
Absolutely. I think Senator Pope hit it right on the nail. But just to the significance, I just want to add on that. I really feel that in light of current events and national events, it's really an opportune time to pass legislation pertaining to Black people. And just like Senator Pope said, here in the state of New Mexico, it's been a long myth that it's been, coined as the tricultural state, when in fact, states like New Mexico have had the longest historical Black presence, ranging from individuals like Esteban from Morocco, who came here with the Spanish. And it's really time that, New Mexico moves in the direction of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and has the ability to exercise what's in our pledge, united among all people. And I really think that that's the time that we're at. So thank you, Senator Pope.
Thank you, Devontae. Devontae, can you share a little bit about your early involvement? Because by all accounts, everybody that I've asked about how, we got this ball rolling, your name is the first one that comes up. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So like Senator Pope had said, an individual by the name of Augustine Leon Saenz wrote his legislature, Senator Antoinette Cedillo Lopez and Senator Linda Lopez. And at this, shortly thereafter, I wrote to them and asked them, have you considered, such bill? And we started working together, both Augustine and I, and then we had the opportunity even to work through coalition building with a new entity that was formed called the New Mexico Black Organizing Committee. So I really think that it was a really great opportunity to learn from diverse perspectives, diverse communities, really, because as it was mentioned earlier, the Crown Act was inspired here in the state of New Mexico, but it has the ability to serve a lot of people and to really live up to the diversity here in the state of New Mexico.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And so that student, that high school student, got the ball rolling. And then how did he get you involved?
Well, our senators put us in touch with each other. And that's really, a unique thing about the state of New Mexico is we have the ability to have direct contact with our legislatures because it's a citizen legislature. So our legislatures put us in contact, and we started organizing one within the Black community, but then also other communities that would be impacted. There was a great concern for the Native American communities and how this bill would impact people of color, all people of color. As you know, there was an incident at Cibola High School right here in Albuquerque where a female of Indigenous background had her hair chopped off with scissors, and and the teacher had very defaming remarks thereafter that I don't even want to get into, but it really drew a lot of attention on how this bill could impact all people of color and Native Americans in pursuit of, making right what was done wrong in the past. And in light of doing that, we all know that there was a recent lawsuit against the state of New Mexico called the Consolidated Yazzie and Martinez case, which was a case that in a lot of ways pointed out the deficiencies within state government to serve people of color and to address disparities. And in light of doing this, because the Crown Act and also the Black Education Act had strong pursuit to create diversity, equity, and inclusion, the Yazzie and Martinez platform, or plaintiffs, if you will, helped advocate and push this along, and added these two initiatives onto their platform for their legislative agenda. As we know, in that case, African Americans weren't specifically named, yet we have some of the highest disparities, including in Albuquerque, right, where the dropout rate is higher with African Americans. So it really drew urgency to the, again, to the significance, the timing, and the willingness to pass both of them on behalf of state and local government.
Thank you, Devontae. Did anybody want to ask any questions? This is an open discussion, so don't think that you have to wait until the very end if you have a question. Okay, so now I would like to ask Amy, who is the executive director of the State Office of African American Affairs, if she could kind of weigh in on the Crown Act and why this is significant now.
Absolutely, right. I think the discrimination for Black women, discrimination of hair, right, it has such a history. So many of us have gone through those childhood pains of learning how to accept our own hair and love our own hair and all of those things. And I think for me, I got to hear about the Crown Act when it got introduced into legislation and came to the office for an FIR report. And really, the thing that was so important for me is naming it as discrimination. I just think that for so long, we as Black people have been told that we're being too sensitive, or that we're making too big of a deal out of it, or, you know, even that it's our own internalized oppression that makes us straighten our hair, or, you know, be on that relaxing crack is what a lot of people call it, right? And so this bill just really opens up that door for naming it. It is discrimination. It is not something we're doing to ourselves. And that it stops the gaslighting that happens. It stops us from really feeling like, you know, like that we are, well, maybe I am too sensitive. And I think the other powerful thing is the statistics that the organizers around this shared, the statistics and the personal stories about it's not just about beauty and it's not just about your looks, is that it really created a lack of opportunity and a lack of access for people. Is that when you're talking about 3 times as many Black women are getting you know, stuff in their evaluations written about their look or about their ability to be accessible, like that is stopping us from excelling, you know, that is stopping us from moving forward. And it just really makes me think about how often we as Black people go into professional spaces and have to completely shift who we are. And that starts with our look of our hair and the, you know, things that we do, but it also really stops the way that we can come in fully into spaces. It stops the way that I feel like I can talk about things that are important to me. It stops the way that I feel like I can interact and ask for mentorship. And so I'm just so proud of this bill and Representative Stapleton and Senator Pope for bringing it forward, because it really, you know, it does so much more than just hair, right? It does so much more about opening the doors for all of our abilities. And I can't wait to see the doors that it opens for other legislation to come in, right? Because I'm thinking about how, you know, somebody might say, what's the big deal? It's just hair, right? But I want it to be really clear that this isn't just hair. This is our ability to be promoted at work, our ability to be welcomed and inclusive. And, you know, I think that this is the first step towards much legislation that is going to put African Americans here in New Mexico with a big spotlight on what has happened and what can change.
Thank you so much for that. Did anybody else want to weigh in? Dr. Pichon, how about you?
I think I'm really just enjoying the conversation and learning a little bit more about how we got started with the legislation here in New Mexico. And I think it is one of those groundbreaking legislations that I think will kind of catapult us, because people don't realize that we get discriminated against just because of the way that our hair grows out of our scalp. You know what I mean? Like, this is our natural state, and people are discriminated based on that. And so it does limit opportunities. And so I agree with everything that has been said. And I am thankful for research such as what Michaela's doing, because I think it puts those stories out there, because I really don't think individuals know or understand how individuals are discriminated because of their hair, and what that means for individuals. And so, and one of the things I do want to add is, because we ask people to tell their stories, one of the things we don't always realize is that we're re-traumatizing people sometimes. And so they have to relive those experiences. So you're asking someone, well, what happened? And then they have to tell you what happened, but then they have to tell you the impact of those actions on their psyche, on themselves. And so it's really difficult to keep bringing these things to light. So I am thankful for this legislation to really open opportunities and hopefully open conversations, because I do know that there are a lot of New Mexicans who did not even realize that individuals were being discriminated because of their hair.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Yeah. So I saw Michael, then Devontae, and then Senator Pope.
Thank you, everybody. And I made sure to bring my hair down for this when it comes to this occasion, because I know one of our my community sisters, my village sisters, my tribal sister, Michaela Luarkey, the daughter of former Governor Richard Luarkey, is also in this fight because she is a woman who has that discrimination against her. But when we come into this, and I'm sorry if I'm breathing a little bit, I'm also doing some elliptical at the moment. I always joke about how I do things kind of twice in a row, but it's the re-traumatization, as Dr. Bashan mentioned. During this era, we had the Termination Act when it comes to Native Americans. This is where boarding school generation came on in. This is where hair was taken from us when it comes to Native men and was told you must now be this American ideal. So when it comes to this, it's a part of regaining cultural strength, regaining perseverance. But again, when we have incidents like what's happening at Cibola High School, it goes back to that control. It goes back to that sense of we are no longer individuals. We are not human. We are people to be controlled. And this is just that sense when it comes to those evaluations that we brought up before. Going into that personal hit of, well, you can't, you can't dock me based upon my performance. You can't dock me based upon my who I am. You have to go into the personal of, oh, because they have hair, because they wear their hair in a certain way, they wear their hair in a particular style, that, oh, they must not be professional. But it's the character. As we talk about our great leaders, it's not the content of it is the content of our mind, not the color of our skin, not the length of our hair. So thank you all for taking on this fight as we continue to look at the humanity of our communities. Because again, this is not just a hair issue, it's a human issue of how we are looked at and how we are valued in our own state. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for those of you who don't know Michael Ray, he is my comrade. He is the director of our American Indian programs at NMSU. I think it was Devante and then Senator Pope.
Yes, and I just wanted to bring up a facet of the bill too that was just mentioned. It was mentioned, I hope that I'm not judged on my appearance of the hair, but by the the content and the work product, and that's in fact what it does too. There was a recent study by NPR that projected that discrimination costs the country in the past 5 years $16 trillion. And if you look into the economic, I know that there was a question of someone doing research here. There was a study conducted at Harvard University by Professor Diva Pager, who I wrote about in the op-ed for the Crown Act. And what she talks about is how white women in New York City with a with a criminal background were more likely to gain employment compared to their counterparts, Black women who had a college education. So it really points out to the implicit bias that happened in the workplace, and in some states, the Crown Act actually was not successful because there was no framework like we do here in New Mexico of having, like, say, a strong definition of human rights, which we have a Human Rights Act. I believe it was a state like Georgia who was initially unsuccessful at that in passing the Crown Act because of the framework that didn't exist. And through that, we do have the Crown Act does provide protection for employees. And in that, if there were any type of discrimination, they would go through the make an appeal to the Human Rights Bureau within the Workforce Solutions Department.
Thank you, Devante. Senator Pope?
Sure, thanks. I just want to remind folks that really this Crown Act campaign really started from really a racist commercial that came from Dove a few years back, right? You had the Black women go take a shower and come out as a white woman. So there was some good done after that, and they're trying to do right by promoting this. But I'd also like to say, with what was mentioned before, this really was a community effort. Augustine Sines, high school student at Albuquerque High School. I'd also like to say he was just accepted to Harvard. This is a great young man. Devante stepped up. Women in the Black Organizing Committee. So this wasn't me, this was them doing the work, and this will probably be some of the discussion later, but that's really how we're gonna get legislation like this stuff done. It needs to be coming from the community. We need the community making calls to other senators, other legislators to make sure that we can get it passed to get those votes. We need you calling in during the committee meetings and expressing how important this type of legislation is. Because once again, I can tell you, there were so many folks that had no idea about this. And it gave me an opportunity as the first African American state senator to talk about this on the floor. You know, I had my picture up. It's hard to see right now. I'll try to show it. I showed my senior year picture, you know, up on the board on the Senate floor when I was presenting this bill. And even though I had been in the military, in some ways I was kind of sheltered from discrimination and the fact that we all had to keep our hair low, and you know, I didn't face that. I knew this was real from family members, cousins, everybody. I just know this was real. And it's not, once again, it wasn't just discrimination. This is impacting the financial well-being of our community. So it's so important that we did something. Going back to the trauma, I can tell you after I was on the floor, and I even talked about when I was a little kid going to kindergarten and my mom had cornrowed my hair the night before, and I got teased the next day. And the teachers didn't help me, and I went home crying. And I never wanted my hair done that way. You know, it made me feel ashamed of my culture and my community because I was the only Black student at my school. And when I told that story and I showed that picture and I showed how important this was, you know, I got through to folks. On the Senate floor, there was no opposition. But that trauma came out. When I got done, I had emotions. I was crying on the floor because you don't realize how much this impacts your life. And I think New Mexicans and people needed to understand how important this bill was. It's hurting and impacting so many people. And then when we talk about really that cross-sectionality, right? We have so many people here that are also mixed, you know, they're African American, Indigenous, and Hispanic. And they have hair just like me. I mean, I get questioned like, well, you know, what are you? You know, it matters what part of the country I live in, you know, but they need to know it's not just even that 3% who identify themselves as African American. This is even hurting more in our community than that. So I just wanted to express that and really just make the notion that this is really about a community and effort, and we just have to find ways to come together and get this message across to folks. Because once again, there were so many senators, so many legislators that once they found out this was going on, they were so supportive. But once again, they had no idea this was going on.
Thank you, Senator Pope. And again, I just want to remind everyone that while this is a discussion, it's also a call to action. And so I want to take a commercial break, so to speak. And one of our scholars here on our campus, Michaela Gorman, is actually doing research. So Michaela, I want to ask you once again, for those who are just joining us, if you could share a little bit about your research and how we can help to support that.
Absolutely. And thank you again. I always think that these types of conversations are very valuable because, again, as Senator Pope said, the people just don't know about these issues. So for my thesis, I'm studying the experiences of Black women as it relates to their hair and some of the struggles that they endure with their hair, specifically living in the Southwest where hairstylists are, you know, far and few between, and sometimes we have to travel in order to find the products that we need. A lot of the time, styling our hair comes with a lot of labor that, again, it goes under the radar. These are things that kind of aren't talked about. So for my thesis, this is what I'm studying. I shared a link in the chat to my survey. I can share it one more time. And this is open to all Black women, all women who identify as Black, including biracial women. I want to hear about everyone's experiences with this issue. You can follow the link to the chat. My phone number and my email is there if you have any questions about like where the data is going or hopefully some findings sometime soon. But again, I want to thank you guys for having these kinds of conversations because they are very important to have.
Thank you, Michaela. And so I also wanted to share, so Brandy Stone, the director at UNM's African American Affairs Student Services, and we work very closely together on a lot of things, all things, that are concentrated on our students. And so we co-hosted and co-sponsored the Crown Act, New Mexico Collegiate Crown Act, and we had over 100 college students join that conversation. And so I think that it is important to provide these spaces simply because, like, again, in Las Cruces, we represent less than 3%. We're actually, less than 3% of the population here. And so as Dr. Pichon always says, it's important to have these safe spaces to have these conversations, but I also think that it's equally important to have these spaces for education, right? Because if you are not one that is impacted by something, you don't really know about the lived experiences of people. And so I'm hoping that these conversations will spark some empathy, some education, but again, it is definitely a call to action. I wanted to ask Mrs. Love, who has been a beloved educator in the Las Cruces Public Schools over 20 years, and she is a principal. And so, Mrs. Love, I would like to ask if you could weigh in on this, because I know that you have some students that will benefit, that have been impacted, but will also benefit from the Crown Act.
Definitely. I was very excited when I heard about the Crown Act, because in my 27 years as an educator and also as a principal, I wear my hair in braids, and, I went to braids several years ago. And so just having like general conversations with people thinking, will you be able to be promoted as an administrator with wearing your hair like that? Something as simple as that, where they don't look at it as discriminatory, or, why does that matter? Especially with the job that we're in. And then I've seen with students in Las Cruces, of course, our population is less than 3%, but we do have students, African American students and students of color at every school in the district. And a couple of years back, where the school nurse and the teacher questioned a child who had come in, and this is an honor student. He was the grandson of another administrator in the district, and he had had his hair done in twist or locks. And so they thought, is that clean? The question, and having to have that conversation with staff as well as the family, because of course it was offensive, and addressing that. So, and where the teacher and the nurse didn't view their comments or their take on it as being racist. They were like, we're not racist. We wouldn't think that that was discrimination. But I'm having to educate people on that's a hairstyle in which the family has chosen to send the child to school. And then he didn't want his hair in twist, similar to one of the other guests. But and it's something that's very real, even in Las Cruces. And so when I heard that this was being addressed, I think many of us, I've been an educator for 27 years, and just different things have come up, especially with our young ladies that are going through, and our children who are biracial or whatever, where the families really don't know, they come, as an African American administrator, how do I fix my grandchild or my child's hair? And so I think it's really real, because this is that child's self-esteem, as they're going through school, how they feel about themselves. And why is that so important, when we're educators and we're in the business of educating children, in content areas. But I think it's so important. So when I heard that this was something, I was like, yes, of course I'll get on. I have a lot, and just a lot of, I've experienced, I know, in just my life, my years as an educator, how important this is, and just educating other individuals that this is a real issue, and that we do have African American students also in our schools. We recognize, and not just African American, but still students of color. And as we hire, I know in Las Cruces, one of the things that I've tried to encourage is really hire a diverse staff where it represents all the cultures, even though the school that I'm at, it's a rural school, and it's in, you know, in the outskirts of Las Cruces and Doñana. But our staff, I'm proud to say we have a very diverse staff with 2 African-American males, myself, and then Anglo-Hispanic, Asian, and Native American, male, female, all different ages and everything else, because students need to see people who are different than themselves in just a variety of ways in order for them to grow up accepting and of the diversity that we have within our culture. And I think in our society, and I think right now is so important. It's so important because we have to, and I'm in an elementary school, so just really reaching the children, reaching the young people to say, hey, this is okay. You know, everybody, this is okay, you know. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to be part of, I'm in the car, so I'm kind of like out of kilter, out of my normal space, but I'm really excited about this legislation. I am. So thank you. I'm glad that I'm here today.
Thank you so much. So we want to take the time to acknowledge that Representative Cheryl Williams Stapleton has joined us. Representative Stapleton, thank you so much. We are honored to have you here with us today. When I reached out, I asked Nicole, I was like, Nicole, we got to get her here. And you agreed right away. So thank you so much. We would love to hear from you. You're still muted, Representative.
Good afternoon, ladies and gent, and Senator Pope. Are you the only no, you're not the only gentleman. I apologize. I was on with the speaker. I was doing committee assignments this afternoon right before you. So you're about my 3rd Zoom meeting for the afternoon. And I just would like to say that I am excited about both legislation that Senator Pope and I have passed in relation to the Black Education Act and having the Crown Act passed. It represents work that the community has put forth. The collaborative groups have worked together to make sure that the legislation and the policies that we are passing in the state of New Mexico is representative of the people who resides here in New Mexico. And looking at it, making sure that it matches the kind of policies that represents what our children are looking forward to, especially in education, and also especially with the Crown Act. And it wasn't possible to get it done. Senator Pope and I make sure the legislations were passed and up to the governor to get signed. But it was you, the community, that came forth with the concept and the idea and the length and the breadth of what it takes to make that policy become real. So my hats are off to each and every one of you. And I say thank you, not thank me, but thank you for making sure that we were able to get the legislation with the language that the community agreed upon and that was passed in the last legislative session.
Thank you, Representative. Does anyone else have anything to weigh in before I move to the next question? I actually have been having over the last week having conversations with some of our athletes on our campus. And so I like that this is very inclusive because some of them have expressed, you know, the traumatic experiences of being asked if they could, you know, cut their locks, or if they could look more presentable. And so I think that this legislation is very far reaching. I know that initially when Dove, you know, set out to do this, it was about Black women, but I think that we are now learning that this is such a shared experience across so many populations that it is more about making sure that everybody understands that this is for us all and that we can all benefit, whether or not it is a lived experience or if it's something that you can take away and be an ally in making sure that other people understand our lived experiences. I know this morning for myself, you know, I was like, been wearing my hair straight all week because of the different meetings. And this morning I got in the shower, I was like, oh, I can just wash my hair and just go, and not even, because I knew we were going to be having this meeting. And so I want to echo what people have said, that it is a very conscious decision when you get up every day. How should I wear my hair, and who am I going to be around so that I can be seen as a valid member of this conversation beyond my hair? Christopher Love, I would like to ask you to weigh in as a new educator and also as an alum of NMSU and a former Black Student Association president.
No, again, hearing that this type of legislation was passed is wonderful. Definitely as a teacher, I'm seeing our students at my school, particularly our students of color, they're feeling a little bit more, and just in general, just in I guess the past 2 years, I've seen where students are feeling a little bit more confident, African American students in particular, wearing their hair the way that they want to wear. I remember when I was in school as a student, African American students typically, I know for male students, they would either have a short haircut, and for female students, they would typically straighten their hair, or something of that nature. And that's something that brings joy to me, seeing African American students, particularly at the school I work at, feeling more free in this modern era to wear their hair the way that they want to wear and everything, and doing that. But with that, I overhear students of other cultures and ethnicities. They'll question them, and they'll ask them, why do you wear your hair like that, or why do you do that? And that's the times when I know I pull them aside and, hey, they're wearing their hair the way that they want to, like anybody else. This is something that's part of, that makes them feel pride, or this is what's part of their culture, and this is what they like to do. And I think for a lot of students that aren't African American, they don't necessarily understand, again, the trauma of people that have been teased based on their hair. So I think, again, there's still a long way to go with educating the masses about why this is important, and why we need this type of legislation, and just why we need to respect everybody's decisions, particularly with their hair. And what I heard about the legislation that's excellent as well is the protection with religious headdresses, because I have a few students who are Muslim, and they wear their personal religious headdresses, and you'll see students and even a couple of teachers, they'll kind of give them a look, and again, they feel a little bit self-conscious. But it's nice that we do have this legislation that's going to protect, that's wide ranging, and is going to allow our students to feel confident and continue to grow their self-esteem. And I work at a middle school, so I see the kids, and they have such a fragile self-esteem. So this is just more and more to be able to protect that. So that's why legislation like this is wonderful. So
thank you, Christopher. We're very proud of you. So I would like to, Ignacio, I would like to ask you to weigh in.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking something else. So I'm very ecstatic to see legislation like the Crown Act go through, because 10 or more years ago, this would not have been possible. I was always told by my mother growing up, don't get tattoos, don't have any crazy funky haircuts, always make sure you wear a suit and tie or you won't get hired. It was considered that having a different hairstyle than something short and cropped was career suicide, basically. Like, it would limit your opportunities for success. But now that we have legislation like this passing through, and I hope it'll go through to other states as well, and at a federal level nationwide and throughout other countries, that we can continue to promote success and excellence for young professionals of all races throughout the future, and religions, as you were saying, because there are people who have headdresses, hijabs, and certain ways of covering themselves and presenting themselves to society. And hair is just so much more than, hairstyle is just so much more than like how you go about your day. It can be indicative of your own representation, your culture, your religion, and who you are as a person. You know, although I'm Ignacio with the high top fade, it's more to it than that. I'm not just copying the 90s, 80s style. I swear, I'm not just Kid and Play walking around or Will Smith. You know, it's who I am. It represents who I am. Every day I get up and I brush my hair, I'm showing the world who I am. And I look around at the screen and we all have different hairstyles. And that's because it represents us. So this legislation protects our identities, regardless of who we are, where we come from. And I think that's what's most important. And I'm very happy to see it pass.
Thank you. Thank you. And lastly, I'd like to ask Tammy if she would weigh in. Maybe she's not able to. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and move on. I want to kind of switch gears now that Representative Stapleton is here and talk a little bit about the Black Education Act. I want to first and foremost say, Representative Stapleton, thank you for the opportunity to serve on the Committee for the Education Act. Indeed, it was an honor to work alongside so many amazing professionals that added so much value and richness to the conversation. But I know that this has been a labor of love for the Office of African American Affairs. And so I just wanted to ask Representative Stapleton, if you could just share for those of us, for those people who are here who don't really know much about it, if you could kind of talk a little bit about that and you know, why you felt that it was important to do this.
Here we go. Okay, so Nicole Bedford worked for me this legislative session. Devante Watson had worked for me in the past and was working with the legislature again. And my understanding, there was a team of individuals that got together. I met with the team where on Zoom, where we discussed various aspects of the legislation. Nicole said that she had been working on it prior to now, way back when she was working with the Office of African American Affairs. And so it was a dream of hers, along with others, to make it become a reality. And I thought that this was the opportune time to do it. It was the time when we look at education across the state of New Mexico. And then we realized that over the years, we've had the Hispanic Act and we've had the Native American Act. And of all the years I've been in the legislature, we have consistently updated, improved, added policy and legislation to those acts. And this year with the pandemic, we saw how much it affected I did as an educator, saw how much it affected our Black children. And also how through education enterprises and education resources, the lack of it that was within our community. And so when that piece of legislation was brought to me, I was excited and dynamically happy to make sure that I can get that piece of legislation passed. So my first step was to make sure to work with the Finance Committee and to make sure that I presented to the different interim committees, the Education, the Native American, which is the Indian Affairs Committee, the Courts and Corrections Committee, the Legislative Education Study Committee. During the interim, we prepped the issue forward. The same thing we did with the Crown Act. And the Crown Act had a lot more emphasis throughout all the interim committees also. And so in putting that legislation out there, legislators before it was introduced was familiar with it. And Dr. Bannerman, who is now a deputy within the education department, she was also at the meeting and on the team that I met with and gave many ideas towards putting the legislation similar to the Hispanic Education Act. And then our Senator Pope, got elected. And I asked him to also co-sponsor and the bill with me in terms of carrying it in the Senate. And so the logistics are there to make sure that that piece of legislation got passed. However, once the bill was moving, the Secretary of Education and Dr. Bannerman said, we need to have some changes made to this piece of legislation based on their analysis of future, what should happen, how should this council be established, who should be on the council, what are the various groups that should be part of the council. And so with that, we made differences and changes within the piece of legislation, constructed it according to what the public education department wanted, especially specifically to the Black Education Council and the various groups, like somebody from the university, parents, teachers, community groups, advocates that would be part of this council that would work with our community at large to know. And now I think the governor has appointments as well as the public education secretary has appointments in putting this council together. But basically, the piece of legislation looks at determining what is happening with African-American children in the state of New Mexico regarding education, and how this part of the PED, this sector of the PED, will look at education for our Black children and increase services and resources to them. And that's what the goal was.
Thank you, Representative Stapleton. And I know that I just refreshed myself on different aspects of it. And I wanted to ask any of the higher education faculty that are here to weigh in on this, because there is specific language in the act that kind of talks about training and anti-racism kinds of things that will be implemented at the higher education level. And so I wanted to ask if anybody had any thoughts about that. Dean Pashon?
Well, thank you so much, Ms. York. One of the things that we do at NMSU is we have a strike force that meets every morning at 7:30, and we look at legislative bills that impact NMSU, impact education. And so I can just say that I was very excited to see this act coming through, because I think it makes it more intentional, the efforts that we have to make to ensure that we are addressing the education of African Americans in the state. And I think what has been happening is that we've kind of been lost in the tricultural world of the land of enchantment. And so I think this act just kind of puts it in the forefront that this is a population that we need to pay special attention to. And so I did listen to the president's speech the other night, and I also have been looking at the commentary that's been coming out since then. And I believe I read an article today, and it talked about how he was calling for Black education. And some of the senators or some of the Congress people are now starting to talk about this is going to be divisive for the country. And I was reading the article and I was really trying to understand, how can educating people about all individuals' contribution to our society be divisive? And so I was really reading it, and I was trying to be objective and really kind of see, well, are they making a valid point or argument in here that we might want to address? And I wasn't able to find it, because the only thing I can see is that we're trying to improve education so that everyone is informed. And so one of the things that I always say is that we need to stop these notions that people are an anomaly when they show up in higher education and they don't look like all of the other students. And it's because students haven't been taught along the way that everybody has contributed to our society. And so when they see them sitting next to them in a classroom, they start thinking, well, how did you get here? What did you do? What do your parents do? They don't know, and they don't know because they've not been educated. And what if we do educate everybody about everyone's contribution? Then we all are here and we're all contributing, and you see me as a contributing person in society, and I see you as a contributing person to society. So I think this act is really moving us in the right direction, and I think it's helping us be more intentional about a population, especially in New Mexico, that it's easy to be kind of not discussed or not in the forefront because of the small numbers. And so because we are such small numbers, and people just think everything is okay. And so this gives us an opportunity to talk about our contributions. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about our struggles as well, and make sure that people understand what we're experiencing as well. So I really appreciate this. The moment I read it, my heart sang. I think last year there was some similar legislation, or some that kind of introduced the ideas. This year I thought it was more robust. And so I am just thankful that we're making progress in New Mexico. I really am. And I'm really excited for all the hard work that went into it.
Thank you, Dr. Pichon. Before I ask Nicole Bedford to weigh in, I did want to share, so in my role, I am an independently licensed therapist. And so I can speak firsthand, and I used to be one of the counselors at Lynn Community School. And so I can speak firsthand about the psychological trauma, as well as some of the psychological barriers that I know that our students and parents have faced in just not feeling that they had the protections that they needed when issues were brought to the forefront. In my role as the former second vice president of the NAACP, I was the education chair, and I had the daunting task of fielding complaints with Dr. Lozano, who is an amazing human being. Let me just say that. But I had the daunting task of fielding these things, and it was very eye-opening for me. Number one, being from the Midwest, I'm from Cleveland, and so when I moved here, just realizing the differences in child welfare laws and those kinds of things. But it was also very interesting to see that people genuinely didn't have a clue about the level of trauma and about the damage that our students were facing, and our parents who did not know what to do and how to help their kids process that trauma. I do know that also the lack of culturally relevant curricular in the schools is also very problematic. I remember realizing that I needed to start wearing my hair in its natural state because the students wanted to do it, but they didn't feel comfortable doing it. And so we had this day at Lynn, let's just wear natural hair, and everybody started doing it. And I noticed that the more that we did it, even after I wasn't doing it, the students were starting to do it more. But it just spoke volumes to me about they're taking pride in who they are. And then they wanted to ask questions of teachers in their classrooms, which was related directly to their culture. And that was something that was just not happening before. And so we were able to have conversations with staff who was also feeling uncomfortable to ask questions. And so I think that this act is extremely important because it not only provides opportunities, supports, and safeguards for students, but it also provides an opportunity for educators, parents as well, for all of us to come together to provide a safe space. Because I do think that if we don't do it intentionally, then we unintentionally create this vicious cycle of harm that is happening to our students, and they are in droves not wanting to attend school. And there's this disconnect about making these assumptions that they just not interested in learning. And it's so so much deeper than just not wanting to learn, but when you don't feel that you are safe in a space, or when you feel that you don't have the representation. And I think that that is another thing that is extremely important that I have conversations about is look at your literature. Do students of color see themselves positively represented? And if we're looking through our textbooks right now, no, they do not. And so we need to fix that. And so as a therapist, as a clinician, I find great value in all of this work that has been done, especially when you consider the monumental task of climbing up a hill with representing less than 2% of the population. So this is significant. And I want to echo what Representative Stapleton and Senator Pope has said, like it has taken a community. And so I want to ask Nicole Beffert to weigh in, because I know that she was an early part of that community. I remember, 6 years ago that this was something that was on her radar. So Nicole, if you could just weigh in.
Hi, and I'm sorry I had my camera. I'm not at home. I'm in the car, so I apologize. Are you able to hear me? I put headphones on because you can hear the traffic. Okay, good, perfect. It's just like you were saying, it started 6 years ago when I was with the Office of African American Affairs, and we had an education team, and we were just talking about how our children are being treated in the schools, how our parents don't feel comfortable in talking with administration, and how they had the Indian Education Act, they had the Hispanic Education Act. And so that's what we started with. And we were like, how can we start the Black Education Act? So it started prior to the prior administration when back then Governor Susana Martinez was in office. And we worked on it. And finally, just this year, we got it finalized. Just working with the different community members. We started out with community. We started out with college professors. We had legislators. We had community members, and then it dropped down, and then we had a small group. And with this last task on a push with the Education Act, we had Dr. Vicki Betterman was in there before she went with PED. We had Dr. Trefenia Peel that was involved in it. Dr. Martin was in. Yeah, Dr. York, Kimberly York was involved, and several others in the community. And we just sat down and we just said we had to get it done, and we had to get this out. And once we got the verbiage in there, we invited Representative Stapleton, and she took the horns, she took the bull by the horns and ran with it. And I can vouch, because I worked for her during legislation, how hard she worked in pushing this bill and making sure that everyone was, making sure that we were going to get this bill passed. She worked very hard, very long hours, passionately in getting it passed. But like everybody was saying beforehand, the reason that it's so important for this to take place is because, we are such a small number, so our kids don't really get counted. Their feelings are not taken in hand. I always remember when Dr. Trefenia Peel had a class on how to teach Black students, and she wanted to put them in the schools, and the school systems were like, well, a lot of us don't have Black kids, but what if they do? And so it's just years of hearing those stories, of hearing how our children were treated, of hearing how our administrators are treated. One administrator just went through school every day and having the N-word written on the lockers, and having they're having that written, having to paint every day, having students having to walk in hallways with headphones on so they wouldn't be called the N-word every single day. I mean, just hearing those stories over and over, and then having parents not know where to go. I had stories with my own children, and there was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to get help. There was nowhere to go. There was nowhere to talk to. So something needed to be done. So with the Black Education Act, not only are we putting in the anti-racism training, but we're going to have a hotline so people can call. And it's not just for African-American students, it's for all students of color who are facing any type of racism, that will have a hotline that we can address these issues, and we can make these schools more responsible on how they can attack these issues that are happening in their schools, so all of our children can feel safe. And that's the big part, is just having our children feel safe. And then also being included. I mean, if you look in our education, you look in New Mexico history, there's a paragraph of Black history, and it's literally one paragraph on Black history. And so me being born and raised in Albuquerque, I never knew about our history until I started college at Eastern. And so you never hear about ourselves here in New Mexico. So this act is really going to give the ears, the voice, the eyes for African American children and their families. So I'm really, it's exciting. And I just wish one of our members, our original members, was Bahati Anasali, and she passed away last year. So I hate that she didn't get to see that this act was finally put into bill. But I'm very happy to see that it is.
Thank you, Nicole.
May I make a point on based on what Nicole just mentioned about the fact that there's a lot more needs to be done, and that as a community, we still need to stay focused. And based on that, you know, Shani Harvey is on here, and I want to congratulate her on her new position in terms of equity and engagement and inclusion with the state of New Mexico and diversity, because what they do within that department for the state of New Mexico will help shape also what happens in the education sector in regards to those particular issues and African American children. So thank you, Shani. And she was one of my former employees as well.
Thank you, Shani. And actually, Shani has been joining us throughout this entire series. So thank you for being here, Shani. Did you want to say anything?
Thank you all for having me. And sorry, Shani Harvey, but thank you, Representative Stapleton, and thank you, Miss York. I'm just happy to be here and listening to the conversation, really working on those issues within the realms of like economic development and job creation. And bringing betterment to our state. So if I can help anyone there, that's where I'm at. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Did anyone else want to weigh in? Because I wanted to follow up on something that
also in regards to this piece of legislation, when it came to the analysis of what's supposed to be in the legislation or recommendation, Amy Whitfield from the Office of African American Affairs did have input on it.
Thank you. Amy, did you want to weigh in again?
Oh, thank you so much. I think, you know, we're asked as the Office of African American Affairs to analyze different bills. And I think when we saw the bill, what we wanted was more money attached to it, right? And I was able to have a conversation with Representative Stapleton, and what I will say is her expertise in how to get bills through is what really drove a lot of that. And so
and we got more money, and we got more money.
Exactly, right?
And Senator Pope put money to it as well.
Yeah. And so we're just really, really excited to have it. We're really excited to have the council that is very specific, right? I think that one of the things that we should think about is how exciting the Black Education Act is, but other councils that will have representation of Black people as well. So some other ones that passed this year is the Maternal Morbidity Council, but also, you know, I want to encourage people to really look at the councils that were passed, the councils that are already existing. It is so important for us to be looking for those opportunities to sit on those councils. The Black Education Act is really great because it's going to have so many of our community there to speak on that. But I just want to encourage people to get involved in a way that we are being represented on other councils. Really look in on those governors' councils, those advisory councils, those boards. You know, let's really start making sure that we are represented on all of them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Amy. I see Senator Pope and then Ignacio.
I'll be short. I think everything has been said about the Black Education Act, and this was something that was a long time coming. And, you know, I just want to thank the community and folks like Nicole and you know, even Amy, the representative, all the folks that put in the hard work to get this passed. And I was just proud to be the person to represent on the Senate side and get it through. So a very important bill. But once again, we go back to these bills that are really coming from the community, grassroots led, and those are the best bills that we can get done. So thank you.
Senator Pope, if I could ask you, and I'm going to also ask Dr. Matute Chavaria to weigh in on this, can you specifically talk about, from the male perspective, about how valuable this is for our male students? Because I know that it's inclusive of all students, but I know that particularly that our Black male students really, really struggle and are really, really under valued a lot of times unintentionally sometimes, and sometimes intentionally. So can you speak a little bit from the male perspective about that?
Sure. I didn't go to school here in high school and middle school. I grew up in Colorado, but it was similar demographics where I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, even a little less. And coming from an African-American male perspective, not getting that history, not getting that curriculum, or having your school environment be able to discriminate against you or do things, it just creates some unneeded barriers for all of us. And also the fact of being a Black male when you go to school, it's just like the emphasis is really on, are you going to be an athlete? It's like really that's what's really pushed. And I remember even going to UNM afterwards. I remember being in classes and getting done with class or talking about, hey, can I take this quiz another day, or can I do something because I have something coming up, and it was military related. A lot of times the comments I would get is, oh, do you have a game coming up this week? I mean, the assumption was I was there because I played sports, So I think that's why these things are just so important, that we have that history, that curriculum, and showing people like us that succeeded or that are part of the community, that are part of the history. So that's, I guess, what I would say from a male standpoint, because I think that gets lost a lot of times. I'll go back to a story about me. I talk about it, when I ran. I remember all of my high school friends were talking to their high school counselors. And all those conversations with them were, when were they taking their ACTs and SATs and what colleges they were going to. My conversation was real short. It was, we're just trying to get you out of high school. So I understand what's going on with their kids, because it happened to me. And if the thought is, I just want to get you to graduate and get out of here, there's no thought of really supporting me or looking out for my future or anything like that. We have to change that. And I think this is not going to solve the issue, but this is a way to at least give them the support and some outlet to help many of our African American males in our schools, because we see that all the time, even here in Albuquerque. We try to get the data, we try to get the information, because we know that they're suspended more, they're getting disciplined more, and than their counterparts, and that needs to end. So.
Thank you. And I'm also going to ask, and I apologize, Dr. House definitely needs to weigh in on this, because you hit on a lot of things that he has been sharing throughout this series. Dr. House, and then Dr. Matute.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say that I really appreciate the conversation so far. These sorts of spaces always give me joy, especially when we're able to report on good news, right? When we're able to reflect on positive changes that we're all kind of coming together to accomplish. I think of two things come to mind. So one is kind of before the whole idea of Black masculinity within the potential for this legislature, but I want to first say that we really need to understand the potential behind these sorts of legislature, because I'm from Arizona, and I don't know if I talked about this in one of our previous Real Talks or if this was on the podcast, but I was in high school when the whole HB 2281, which is essentially an ethnic studies ban, got pushed through and actually was upheld. And it was specifically targeted at Mexican American studies, but obviously if it's an ethnic studies ban, all sorts of resources that we had for, and specifically at African American studies, was kind of depleted as well. So that there are actual examples of legislature that is trying to do the harm to our communities. So I think that we really need to understand the value and the potential behind these sorts of opportunities and really push for that sort of equity we want to see in our education. As far as how I see the potential within Black masculinity within this space. I too come from a space that I talked about in my podcast episode as well, where I struggled with the athlete identity because that was all I was really able to associate with at the time. And I think that a strong core curriculum that really showed me the breadth and beauty of Blackness beyond just being an athlete would have really gone a long way to alleviate a lot of anxieties I might have had growing up. And I think that, once again, the word potential just comes to mind because I think with more educational opportunities focused specifically on Black stories and Black histories, I think we have, it's our job to really make sure we're pushing forth curriculum and opportunities that are backed by legislature that show versions of Blackness that will then convince a lot of Black men to not go down these same misogyny, homophobia, transphobia routes, but instead understand that we don't have to practice the same sorts of domination that happens in whiteness because we need to feel valued in our spaces. Instead, we can be very secure in our own masculinity and still not perpetuate these other sorts of things. So yeah, once again, the word potential just comes to mind.
Thank you, Dr. Matute, and then Ignacio.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm new to Las Cruces. I moved here from Las Vegas. So I was really excited when I learned about the Black Education Act. I'm a mother. I have an 11-year-old son. He's on the autism spectrum, who's experienced a lot of inequities within the school system since kindergarten in our last school district. So moving here and seeing the low population of Black students in schools was pretty alarming. And as a parent and a faculty member, I'm interested to see how this will assist in like the misidentification of Black males in special ed because they're overly identified, and also in the more subjective categories where they're usually represented in emotional behavioral disorders. I can't speak of the statistics here because I'm still learning about the statistics of New Mexico, but just nationally, they're overrepresented in special education, in suspension and suspended at the high rates for the same infractions of their white peers. So moving here, I was already kind of alarmed, him going into special ed and him only being, I think at his school, there's only 2 Black students and they're both in special ed. So that was like ding, ding, kind of problematic already. I'm a huge parent advocate. So I always think about parents that don't know their rights and not able to advocate for their students, what could happen, because I've experienced so many inequities where I've had to, hire a lawyer, take advocates with me, things like that, where parents that might not know their rights, their kids end up in the pipeline of, unfortunately. So I'm interested to see how this would help on the special education side. Representation does matter. So to hire more Black male teachers, recruit more Black students at New Mexico State, specifically in College of Ed, would be great too. That's, I think, a really important initiative as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I just want to once again echo the gracious rejoices for this act that's going to be preserving basically the education of our youth and students in New Mexico. I think it's very important. I was raised to know that education is one of the greatest weapons that you can have to change the world and really make a difference for our community. It really starts with education and hitting those books and putting that information back out to the community and serving others with it. A little anecdote that really showed me that there is a gap in education is when I was living in Dallas, when I was going to middle school, I actually went to a STEM-based magnet school in Oak Cliff, which, if you don't know, has a very large population of African Americans and other minority groups. And it really stands out to me, and I was 12, 13 years old, and I knew this was wrong, because our history textbook said that Ronald Reagan was the current president. And this was a STEM magnet school. A magnet school is supposed to be built on the foundation of, yeah, I know everyone's making faces. I guess I went to school in 1985, but so this school was built on the foundation that they were providing higher education for, these young, mostly Black children. So, to be older now and have the wisdom I do now and see that this legislation is passing to provide suitable education and resources for students is very important. I'm so happy to see it. And I'm happy to know that, we'll be providing current impactful information that will go back to our community and strengthen it in the future.
Thank you, Ignacio. So we are right about at 6:30, and I want to be true to our time of 7 o'clock. And so I'd like to spend just this last half an hour talking about what I started with, and that is, yes, we want to have conversation, but we also want to have a call to action. And so I would like to ask Senator Pope and Representative Stapleton if they can kind of share some insight with us. I know that we kind of touched on this a little bit about, needing to continue things. And if there are specific things that this group that we can do, I can tell you, Kim York, beyond a title, I will remain committed. I have been doing some cultural awareness workshops with the Las Cruces Public Schools, but I am committed to whatever it is that you all need from me to continue to help move the needle forward, to continue to get this information out, to help to get resources. So can you all talk to us a little bit about what is it that you need from us down here in Las Cruces?
Truly, we have to look, watch, and wait and see when the legislation have already been signed by the governor. The effective date for any type of action-oriented activities to take place with this legislation will be July 1st, when the funding has come into play. And I'm sure that the Secretary Stewart will be working with Deputy Secretary Bannerman to make sure that the council will be established and some of the guidelines and procedures that is outlined in the piece of legislation will be put into place. The hotline may not come through based on the amount of funding that we got. $550,000 is what we got when we started out with $200,000. So it depends on how they lay out the processes of establishing the policies that were established within the legislation to take place. However, I believe that individuals on the team that was involved in this piece of legislation and bringing it to fruition and making it work should reach out to Dr. Bannerman to show their interest. And I think maybe an interim steering committee team might be set up to talk about, well, what's going to happen with this council. And even though it requires higher ed individual involved, we want higher ed individual that has been active within our community, that knows what's been happening, not somebody who nobody knows, just select the person because the person knows somebody else. And so our community groups that have advocates that have been working on this need to reach out to Dr. Bannerman and share with their concern and how can they get involved and how can they recommend people for the council.
Thank you very much.
And Kimberly, I don't think I could add much more. Being new to the legislature, this is my first session, but the majority leader, I think she mentioned the right thing, is just following up and making sure we get the right folks onto the council and making sure that the PED is just administering this legislation in the right way. Perfect.
Well, like I said, you have a commitment, my continued commitment to do what I can. Did anyone else want to have any closing remarks? Oh, I see that Amy has her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that one of the things that was put into the bill was youth representation. And that was something that Dr. Bannerman and I really advocated with Ryan Stewart, Secretary Stewart, to put in there. And so we need names of young people who would be very invested in making sure that this happens. And so that is one of the things that, exactly as Representative Stapleton said, please reach out to Dr. Bannerman and let her know, but be very, very specific about making sure that we have young people who can be put on this, because far too often what happens is we hear, well, we couldn't find a young person who who was willing, and I don't want to see that happen. I never want to see that happen, but I definitely don't want to see this happen for this bill, that, when this starts on July 1st, we want to make sure that we have young people with their voices and their experience able to say, this is exactly what happened to me sitting on this council, and making sure that those of us who may be long past being in high school can hear what's happening today.
Thank you so much. Anyone else with any burning thoughts, closing remarks? Okay, with that being said, I'm not going to, Dr. Pichon, you're smiling. Does that mean you wanted to say something? No, okay, all right. I want to thank Mike Cook again for your unwavering support always, not just when things are, hot ticket items, but you have truly been a supporter of Black programs. And so we want to say thank you for being here. And Tammy, thank you. Absolutely. Tammy, thank you. You have been a trooper. You have been here for this entire series. And so we just want to acknowledge you and say thank you so much for your support, and for you joining us just for regular conversation. And so with that being said, Representative Stapleton, thank you so much again. Senator Pope, we thank you. Representative, we look forward to having you with us as our keynote speaker on May 13th for our Black Programs graduation celebration. And thank you, Senator Pope, for already letting me bamboozle you into being our keynote speaker for next May's graduation. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you for being in the trenches and not just here for the optics. You have truly been champions in our community, and we wholeheartedly appreciate you.
Kimberly,
everyone. Oh, I'm sorry.
From NMSU, that was part of NMSU, Mike Cook.
Mike Cook is a reporter with the Bulletin newspaper. Mike?
Okay, I know I knew the names. That's why I just trying to figure out. Okay, thank you.
That's encouraging. Thank you.
And probably, I'm sorry that I didn't mention this in the very beginning. So Representative Stapleton is one of our very own. She is an alumna of NMSU, doing amazing things. So thank you so much for representing us, Representative Stapleton. Christopher Love, we're so proud of you, man. You're doing your thing. Mrs. Love, thank you. Everybody, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.